Hi, I'm Mike Fleming.
And I'm Barb Chose.
And this is the Finding Healthy Church podcast. And this is a podcast where we look at practical wisdom for life together in church life on a journey of finding what it means for a church to be healthy, talking about it, discussing it, sharing stories, etc. We're in the middle of a series of conversations about the nature and purpose of the church. And in the last episode, we talked about how important Jesus thought the church was. And we learned that Jesus prioritized God's family over his physical family, which at the time wasn't very socially acceptable. Probably not at this time either, but Jesus believed that prioritizing God and God's family were not two distinct, separate things. And doing that was a sign of a disciple of his. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at 4 physical signs that a church is healthy. Now, these physical signs can come from observing how healthy physical families behave.
Do you know why? Did you ask yourself that question? Why do you try coming up with these inventions? Two worlds collide, but you can't combine the truth with all these lies. It destroys the light.
Now, Barb, this doesn't happen at the beginning, these signs that families are healthy. And the reason is that behaving with these characteristics that we're going to talk about, they don't happen overnight. It takes knowledge, it takes practice, it takes being together, knowing one another, plus time. And that all takes time for a group of people to be built together in agape love. Would you attest to that with all your experience?
That is definitely true. And it's organic in the sense that it's always happening, because as newer people come in, there's relationships that have to be built. You have to be known and known. You have to include and invite, and you have to be able to help people feel that they can share who they are with you, and you can share with them who you are. And there's just a lot of, relationships take time. I mean, I think if you ask for example, if you ask a husband and a wife who have been married, so my husband and I have been married 52 years, and it has been a constant learning curve. Mm-hmm. I have this theory that about every 7 years, marriages have to kind of regroup and go, oh, okay, let's see, what's new about you now? What's different about you now? What's different about me? And how do we move forward in these new ways and kind of reform, and move forward? So I think even in the church, it's like that. As people come in and dynamics change and, you're different, everybody's different. You don't have people coming in that are there is a common like-mindedness about what it means to be a member of the body of Christ. But how that's lived out takes work and
it takes time. Yeah, just like any relationship, right?
Sure.
Like if you move too fast in a relationship, that's not healthy. Like people would say that if you brought up a marriage or a romantic relationship, if, we all see it in the TV shows that, these people go from meeting each other to being in bed in hours.
Yeah.
Right. And you're like, oh, that's Hollywood.
Exactly.
That's not actually real life. If that would happen in real life, we'd all be like, yeah, that's probably not healthy. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
It takes time, but when it comes to these characteristics that we're going to talk about, like these physical signs of church healthy, things you can observe and actually take a look at your own church experience and kind of analyze it and see where you're at with this. The early churches were like examples that this took time, because the Corinthians, for example, they were a great example of struggling to be a healthy family. If you look at Paul's letters, like the first one, they were suing one another. Yeah. That if your family was suing one another, you'd be like, doesn't seem like a very healthy family. Yeah. They were also splitting on the basis of social status. Mm-hmm.
And Paul was upset that they weren't. Paul was upset that they weren't waiting for one another and eating together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a thing in my house, actually. Because, because my wife and I come from very different families, as is usually the case with married people.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in like a single parent, only child home. And so I was very independent, individualistic in my day to day, figured out how to keep myself occupied, et cetera. But I remember, this happens once in a while, like with her family. If I'll like maybe start eating, there've been times where like I got my food and start eating and she's looking at me like, what are you doing? Like literally you're supposed to get your food, sit down at the table and sit there and look at your food until everybody sits down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was their idea of a healthy family. But I mean, it happened in it's a process in every relationship. It's a process in every church. You know, the Romans in the New Testament, they were dividing by their race. It's just a struggle to be healthy. Like we live in this fallen world and every relationship has these issues. Like you said, you got to fight through, you got to reorient, you got to adjust, recalibrate, and deal with these things. But as you do, things start to happen. As you deal with them, you become more and more unified, right? Over time, as you deal with those things.
Yeah, you get to experience, I think you get to experience really what God's idea of family was. Because I think, when you look at just a regular biological family, I was raised in a family with 4 kids, and we were each very different, and like you said, as you grow up, you have to learn to get along, or you don't get along, or you, in one sense, you're still family. But if you really want to celebrate family, as I think you can have this deep down gut feeling like this is good, it's because family is able to get along in spite of their differences. They have this dogged care and love for one another that they can count on no matter what. And so I think that that's what God's idea was of family. So what do you do as members of the body of Christ?
Mm-hmm.
How do you create that dogged care and love for your brothers and sisters in Christ?
Yeah, I would say this is the main job of a Christian worker. Like after like sharing the gospel and converting people and planning a church, I think the main job is to train churches to think and behave like a healthy spiritual family. Mm-hmm. And you look at the letters written back and forth, usually the letters start with some kind of identity statements, right? This is who you are collectively as a family. This is who you are. Therefore, this is how you are to behave. And I'm reminding you of what I told you when I was there, right?
Yep, exactly.
And so, like again, in the Corinthian situation, I want to read like what he writes to them regarding that issue of people suing each other, because I think it's very pointed and direct. In chapter 6, verse 1 through 8, he says, "Does any of you, when he has a case against his neighbor, dare to go to court before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? If the world is judged by you, are you not competent to form the smallest law courts? Do you not know that we will judge angels? How much more matters of this life? So if you have law courts dealing with matters of this life, do you appoint them as judges who are of no account in the church? I say this to your shame. Is it really this way that there is not one wise person among you who will be able to decide between his brothers and sisters? But brother goes to law with brother, and that before unbelievers. Actually, then, it is already a defeat for you that you have lawsuits with one another. Why not rather suffer the wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? On the contrary, you yourselves do wrong and defraud, and this to your brothers and sisters." So you can see his mindset, right? Is like, wait a minute. Like, you guys are not acting like a family here. You're acting like, well, I should say a healthy family. You're acting like an unhealthy family, because if we saw brothers, I mean, in the world, brothers sue brothers, sisters sue sisters, and parents, etc.
Well, the thing that's interesting is he, in his second letter to the Corinthians, he talks with them about what their ministry is. And he says in 2 Corinthians 5, he says, he's encouraging them. He says, well, from now on, therefore, we regard no one from a human point of view. Even though we once regarded Christ from a human point of view, we regard him thus no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, and behold, the new has come. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. So we also have been called into a ministry of reconciliation, which is counter to what he's just challenging them on right now in the first letter.
Hmm. Yeah, here's a quote from When the Church Was a Family, book by Joseph Hellerman we've been referencing. He says, anthropologists have in fact noted that kinship terms are employed rather sparingly in most societies. So basically saying you don't call people brothers and sisters in regular communication, right?
Right.
He goes on to say, when they do occur, family words are utilized for some very specific reasons. A common pattern seems to be to refer to a person's kinship relation to you, not in everyday conversation, but in situations when that person is violating the norms of kinship, or in situations when you are trying to manipulate him. We generally reserve family language for those times when we want to do a little social engineering. That is, we want to get a child or a sibling or parent to act in a way appropriate to the family relationship. This is how it was with Paul and the Corinthians. And so you see brother and sister language all over the place because he's trying to keep communicating, this is who you are, this is who you are. Therefore, why would you do this? You should be doing this, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's interesting in what he was saying, because I know I've been party to a relationship with another brother who, whenever things got tough and he was having an issue with another brother, he was very much quick to say, brother, like you said here, you're just calling him out. Like, I'm going to remind you what the nature of our relationship is before we, as we continue to work this issue out,
Mm-hmm.
So
I think one of my biggest problems with most modern churches is how, like the company I work for, we have a mission statement, right? We have a vision statement, a mission statement, just like most companies do. And really everything should exude from that. Like that should be the focal point of everything that every department, every person in that company does, is all towards that one, fulfilling that mission, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I think this mission, we've seen that this mission of becoming the new humanity, a new healthy family, God's family, and then acting like it is the mission, right? It's for people to come to know Christ, to enter in the body of Christ, but then to become his family and to act like his family.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like so much, and it's not 100%, but I feel like so much of the activity that happens in churches today isn't necessarily towards that end. Like I said, it's not zero. I think there is meaningful effort put forth. But on the whole, like the things we end up doing, it's like, okay, for example, like when I sit and listen to a lecture, I guess I should say sermon on a Sunday, how is that making us a healthier family? And maybe it is indirectly, like the argument might be like, well, you're learning the word and that's going to motivate you to then go out and, act in a certain way and become a family with your brothers and sisters. But it doesn't feel like the handle on that is very easily grasped, like it doesn't feel like it directly leads to that. Like for the most part, we come and we sit and we listen and then we go home and just live our lives. And then we come back and listen again and go home and live our lives.
Right. And the thing is, nobody really knows how it affects you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is no conversation that goes on unless you have maybe some intimate relationships with people who are part of the same congregation, who hear the same message, who have such an intimate relationship that they can hear your response. They can hear how you've been moved by what was said and maybe cause you to repent or confess something or, change something. But those conversations, usually there isn't the time or the arena for those to happen. Maybe in some of the small groups or, community groups that a lot of the larger churches have.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there isn't sort of a level of commitment to your membership to do that,
mm-hmm.
To be so one to another that you would know my business in one sense, because how do I get encouragement if I'm not willing to share what kind of help I need, what kind of prayer I need, not just prayers of, I'm sick, so pray that I would get well. But no, because I'm really struggling with gossip and I need help. And I need you to be praying for me. I need you to call me when you see me falling away, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
I need that kind of partnership. And you're doing it as a friend. You're not doing it as someone who's trying to get me into trouble or anything like that,
Yeah. Good point. Yeah, so I think we're going to talk about four signs that we can pull from Paul's writings to churches in the New Testament that were signs that he knew he was making progress, or he was communicating to them that this is what it looks like when our church is healthy, because this is what it looks like when a family's healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to start with the first one, which is physical affection. This is not, when we talk about physical affection, this is not like walking around pews, shaking each other's hands after the opening prayer. This is a lot deeper. It's physical affection that is culturally appropriate. It's relationally appropriate for families to show each other. So how would a healthy family show physical affection to one another in their culture and in their context? Now that differs around the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In terms of the actual physical actions. So but here's the thing. Do you shake hands with your immediate family members? Like, do you come home and shake hands with your brother, or do you give him a big old hug?
Mm-hmm.
In a healthy family, you're probably going to give him a big old hug.
Right.
And in some cultures, right, it's even more than that.
Right.
Right. Or it's different, more different. I mean, in our culture, families at least hug.
Mm-hmm.
I have friends that are Greek. I have friends that are Italian, and it's never less than a kiss on the cheek. In fact, it's never less than a kiss on the cheek, even if you don't know the person very well. Some families, you show up and they're just like, give you a kiss on the cheek. You're just like, okay, all right, not used to that,
Yeah.
So it's not like a mechanical law, right? It's not like, people will take a biblical text like in 1 Corinthians, it says, greet one another with a holy kiss, right? And then people will argue like whether or not we should kiss each other or not,
Right.
And it's like, no, this is culturally and relationally appropriate for their time and where they were. Paul was just saying, hey, guess what? Healthy families, which you're supposed to be, they show one another physical affection.
Yep.
So in your context, Barb, in your experience, what has that been like? And has that been true, and how has that developed? What are your thoughts about physical affection in church?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm a hugger. So, and I think we have, I've been part of a congregation that we're just huggers. It's like when we have our gathering time, we always have a time in the middle of it where we actually stop and get up and greet one another and we greet one another with hugs. We just hug each other. And, I'm part of a small congregation, so there's not usually more than 30 people at a time in our gathering and stuff, and then kids. And we encourage, the kids too. They love their huggers. And so we're always doing that, And I think when someone is sharing something that is hard and difficult, what will a lot happen is that one of the members will be sitting with them and will either kind of hold their hand while they're doing it or have their arm around them while they're doing it. Just as a reminder that, we're in it with you. We're here, and to come alongside. And we especially appreciate when our children get to view some of that, because they get to understand the importance of compassion and coming alongside and stuff. So I think we try to not make people feel uncomfortable when they come to visit. We always say, we're huggers around here. Are you huggers? And if they say no, then we just kind of greet them in a different way, pat on the shoulder or something like that, but always with a welcome and always engaging people, letting them know that we're glad they're here, that we see you. Mm-hmm. And I think, through the years, that's been really important. So, yeah, and I think physical affection is always, unfortunately, because of the way the world is and the care and the concerns, and you have to be careful. It makes things, harder, but I think when you are part of a congregation where the people have relationships, then there's a freedom in being able to hug each other and come alongside each other, and things like that. So that continues to happen, our kids love to be hugged by other adults that they see as aunts and uncles, or not even biological aunts and uncles, but aunts and uncles, because we're all one and we're all in the Lord's family,
Yeah, it feels like what you're describing feels like a family reunion to me.
Yeah.
It's like when you get together, it's kind of like a family reunion. Now, family reunions only happen usually once a year or something like that. Yeah. But in terms of, we went out into the world, we've been living for a week. We come back together and we're reuniting the family together in a gathering, sort of a thing.
Yep. Yeah. And we, but for us, it was at least weekly, if not bi-weekly, because we would have Bible studies every week together as a congregation. And we always started off with a meal. So people would come to our Bible studies from, not necessarily just members. They were invited to come and so they would experience that kind of physical affection that we have for one another, even in those contexts,
Yeah, they get a little taste or observance of like a little healthy family.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Number 2, observable physical sign is there's unity despite conflict. So a good sign of a healthy church is that they stand by one another despite conflicts. They stop at nothing to work through them. As mentioned earlier, right? Good brothers and sisters would rather be wrong than sue. And so there's always a give and take in these conflicts. Like, what am I giving up? What are you giving up? Sort of a thing, compromise. But good brothers and sisters don't just divide over meaningless opinions, disagreements, things like that. And when they're confronted with a choice between what's good for them individually and what's good for the group, good brothers and sisters put the group first, as we've talked about in past conversations about what brothers and sisters meant in the New Testament, what the original authors meant when they said that we were a family. It means we put the group first, and to do that, there's going to be conflict, but we keep unity as we work through that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So you have any thoughts about this one, Barb, in your experience? I'm sure this is like a regular occurrence.
Yes, obviously. First of all, the call is to have unity in spite of the diversity. There's already the assumption when you look at the 12 disciples, they were a diverse bunch. I mean, and Jesus brought this group of 12 together amongst and some women and said, "I'm going to make you out of you. I'm going to build my church."
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, we've always said that there's always got to be unity in the midst of our diversity. So we have, through the years, taken on, like even in 2 Corinthians, where he talks about having the ministry of reconciliation. Reconciliation has always been important to us. And I've seen the pros and cons. In other words, I've seen the reason why reconciliation is important and the working through that and coming out to the other side and ending reconciled, even though you might have differences, but you are at peace. You know, you're in right relationship with each other and you can live in the midst of the diversity versus not doing that and ending in some very painful situations, you know, where things are not reconciled. And so relationships are broken.
Yeah, I feel like this one's tricky. And it takes discernment because you don't want to swing the pendulum to one side where it's like you're dividing over opinions, but you don't want to swing back to the other side where we got to keep unity no matter what we think and how we think differently. Right. We got to be close and we got to be tight and that kind of thing.
Right.
I was in a situation that I still believe did the right thing because we disagreed on some matters of how to function together and how to work together. And they were issues where in the end we couldn't come to an agreement. Mm-hmm. And it didn't mean that we needed to be close personal friends and we needed to work closely together. Right. So we had to divide at a certain level, even though we could still be in the same church. We could still be in this part of the same church. We could be a part of the church in that city. We could figure out certain ways we could work together. There were other ways we couldn't work together, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So those things we disagree on, they shouldn't break our unity in Christ, but they could break our unity in the tasks we do together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And how we belong to one another.
Right. But you're still reconciled. And I think, one of the things that, because when people don't choose to go into that process of reconciliation, that's when things break down, I think. Yeah. And so I think, one of the things that has been important to us is knowing that we've come through that and the 50 years that we were together. And in the last half, we realized that we got a little bit lazy in individually and otherwise in making sure that people were continuing in an alienated relationship, but not doing anything about it, kind of a thing. And so what we did in our congregation is we would ask in our members in our meetings, we'd say, okay, who's got something they've got to talk to somebody about, clear something up or whatever. And we would have people raise their hands. We wouldn't ask them what it was about or anything. We might say, well, who is that person? And remember, we're a small group, so it's not but what it did was, and so if I had something, I would raise my hand and I'd say, well, I'd need to talk to Mike about something. So what that did was it gave me the impetus that I needed to take care of it. It gave Mike the knowledge that there was something that needed to be talked through. And so, Jesus even says, if you know that someone has something against you, then just put your sacrifice at the altar, put it down and go take care of it. So you have those two parties. And then you have the congregation who then are praying for you and encouraging you, asking you, how did that go? What needs to be helped? So there is a real partnership in achieving that ministry of reconciliation. And then coming out on the other side where you can, like you said, you're free,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, I think that happened in our situation. Like, I think there's nothing between the people that we came to this conclusion, and I think what you're saying, that's the important thing,
yeah.
that we can go on and be healthy with the ways that we can work together.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so it's definitely not, just to be clear that it's not one extreme or the other, right? It's not unity
Right.
despite anything that happens or any thoughts that occur.
Right.
It does take a discernment.
Yeah, and I think it is obviously harder to achieve something like that in a larger congregation
Yeah.
than it
Well,
is in a congregation that's,
yeah,
small.
but we're talking about signs of a healthy church, and I think that is a sign of a healthy church is that, hey, we disagree on X, Y, or Z, but we're not going to go to another church.
Right.
Or we're not going to we're not going to divide churches based upon that disagreement.
Right.
Yeah. Unless
it.
it's a Christian or not Christian thing. But I think that's healthy is like, hey, we still work together in these types of ways, even though we can't work together in these types of ways.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's not healthy to work together in those types of ways,
Yep.
That still shows the world.
Yeah. And I think the unfortunate, I think the end of not doing it that way are what are the causes of a lot of church splits,
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And, a lot of church splits, as in like there's 300 different churches in my county.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't just be one church.
Yeah.
Because not the vision Jesus had, but not healthy.
Yeah.
To be so divided up. Yeah. I always imagine like what would it be like if we had one church in our city? And I don't mean one church building. I mean, we can mean many, many, many different places, but similar to the early church where there was a networking, but there was one church and it was all this big web of networked people and figuring out how to work together in different ways and figuring out how to work together. Like, how can we work together? How can we not work together?
Yeah.
But still working together at some level, right? We just don't see that a lot. Okay, got to move on to number 3. Yep. Sharing of resources, the third physical sign of a healthy family. So healthy families, they relinquish the idea that they own their possessions. In episode 6 of this podcast, I encourage everyone to go back and listen to episode 6 if this episode is intriguing to you, because we talked about how the persons within God have possession, but not ownership. And in that episode, that was one of the characteristics or one of the ways that churches can build unity is through the sharing of resources or giving and receiving with each other. And we get this idea of giving through what we see the person within God doing. And that is we know they possess things, but they don't own them, in terms of like all the persons within God own everything.
Right.
But they will possess things at one time or another, similarly to how I possess some things and you possess some things, Barb, but we don't own any of it.
Right.
Truly, because we're going to die and leave it behind. Right.
Right. Exactly.
And so we're just stewarding these things, but a healthy family understands that they're just stewarding possessions that are to be used for the family, and that those possessions are available. They can be used by anyone in the family, especially when people are in need of basic necessities, right? Like food, shelter, clothing. And it doesn't mean that anyone can take anyone else's things, right? Or, the availability of resources doesn't mean that a group of people has one bank account. It doesn't have to be together, right? Because there's still possession, like I said. An example would be like my wife and our parents, we don't have the same bank account, right? But we respect each other's possessions, but there's also this understanding that when push comes to shove, our resources are shared. Like we're willing to share. If they have a need, we're willing to share that with them. If we have a need, they're willing to share that with us.
Exactly.
So it's very frequently that our resources are passed back and forth
Yes.
without needing to keep a tally. Like, we don't keep a tally of who owes who what, you
No.
kind of, usually you do that with like acquaintances,
Right.
it's like, okay, I owe you $40 for when we went out to eat, and then you owe me 30 for this.
Yeah.
But with close family, you don't like keep tabs and stuff like
No.
that. So.
You don't. You kind of
Yes.
forget.
Yeah,
Well,
so there's this activity of sharing, giving and receiving, going back and forth. So in your experience, tell me about that in your experience.
Well, we, as a congregation, we would get together and just kind of like try to discern what are the needs, who's got needs. We were much more about sharing. Our life was sharing. There are some church congregations, communities that believe in what they call a single pot. Everybody throws all their money together and then it gets divvied up. And no, we believed in a shared life because we think that as individual Christians, we need to deal with the idea of sharing. What does it mean to share?
So to clarify, you're saying you did not do that.
We did not do that.
You each still had your own possessions.
Yes.
Which led to dealing with this issue of sharing.
And so as things would come up. So through, our life together, we had situations where there was one family that took care of another family while their husband got training to a skill that would be able to provide for his family, but he needed to do that, and he couldn't do that and work and take care of the family. So one of the families basically were financially able to take them on for a year so that could happen. And that happened. And then he was able to get back on his feet and have a job and take care of his family again. We had another family where he lost his job and his wife wasn't able to work. And until he was able to get another job, we all chipped in and took care of him for that year, the family of 4. We've had visions for some of the folks and our members that were younger, for them to achieve I won't say a job, but a skill, or to become educators, or to do whatever. And so we had people that paid for them to go to college. Mm-hmm. And because they didn't have the monies to do that, and we didn't really want to have them just take student loans out that they would have to take years of paying back or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And all of it was done because we thought it was best for them, and we thought it was best for us as a people to have those kinds of jobs and skills out in the market. We've had a situation where Scott and I were doing fairly well, and we had a sister that had some bills that by herself she just could not take care of them. And so what we did was, while we didn't have the cash on hand, we were able to refi our car and get enough of it down so that we could help her pay that down, and then she could pay whatever she could on it as well. So there's just lots of those kinds of things that we did as a congregation.
Okay, number 4 and last that we'll mention: sign of a healthy family, loyalty. Now, we've talked about this in previous episodes, but we're going to touch on a little here. In a healthy family in the world, allegiance is given to the family first and to everything else second. So when you think about our priorities, we usually say God, family, church. Well, God, family, sports, church, and then go from there. So for the Christian family, this means allegiance is given to other believers first and to unbelievers second. So no matter what the physical relationship ties may be, this is a sign of a healthy family, is this this loyalty to one another. The sign of a healthy church family, then, is this loyalty to one another. How has that played out for you, Barb?
Well, this one is a personal one. So I will give you the example because I think it does demonstrate that. My dad had a 70th birthday party that we were planning. And I had talked to my mom, and so his birthday's like in September. And so I talked to my mom like in May and June, and I said, hey, are we planning to have a birthday party for Dad? And she goes, yeah, we are. And I said, okay. I said, well, let me give you my dates. Let me give you dates that I'm free to come because I have commitments on these other dates. Mm-hmm. And so I gave her like 10 dates, and basically, so she says, okay, so I'm feeling great. So I can do that. I can work it out, keep my church commitments, do all of those things. And then she calls me back and she says, okay, well, I picked this date. And it was not any of those 10 dates.
Thanks, Mom.
But it was the date. And I said, Mom, I gave you these. She goes, well, she gave me a bunch of reasons why, and none of them justified. I mean, she could have done. So what it came down to was I had to kind of realize that. And then she says, well, what kind of commitments do you have? And I said, well, it doesn't matter what kind of commitments I have. I have commitments. And she says, well, are they just your church commitments? And I'm like, well, not just church commitments. These are important. This is an important thing for me. And so it ended up, she says, well, I can't change it because your brother already bought his airplane tickets. And so this was back in the day where you couldn't make changes and all that kind of stuff. So
Pre-COVID.
So it was a difficult thing, but I ended up not going. And it was painful. I called my dad. I explained to him. My dad was a little bit more understanding about it, and everything. But it was, so the painful thing is, and I know that most people might be listening to this might think like, what the, but it's.
Yeah, they would think you should have gone. Yes.
Yeah.
You think most people?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, it's like, I said to my mom, I said, well, what if I said it was my job? See, then I think she would have not have been so hard on because I would say, well, it's my job.
She would have picked a different date, maybe.
Yeah, she might have picked a different. So, I don't want to say that that's, in terms of, but it is an example to me, of the importance of the balance that we as Christians in this day and age have to realize, what is the nature of my relationship with God and his people and his family in relationship to my blood family, my biological family. It's, those are tough. I mean, they are tough, but I think those are the things that we have to kind of understand, that's what Jesus says, who are my brothers and my sisters and my mother, those who do the will of my Father. So I think those are the things that we don't know. I think in our day and age, what that looks like and how do you flesh that out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Food for thought on that one for sure. Yeah. As we talked about in our last episode, we kind of worked through some quotes of Jesus in the Gospels about some pretty fiery quotes, right? Yeah. The one you just said, things like if a person does not hate his mother, brothers, and of course that English word is not the same as probably the author meant. It doesn't mean hate them. It means, prioritize. If a person does not prioritize God's family first,
right,
they cannot be my disciple,
right,
basically.
Right.
Some very fiery, interesting, challenging for especially an American individualist, challenging quotes from Jesus.
And people don't understand that he doesn't mean hate as we understand hate.
Right. It means prioritize. If you don't prioritize God's family. Yeah. All right, we got to wrap up. So what is healthy for a church? The thing we're trying to point out in this episode is that there are characteristics you can look at your own church experience, characteristics of healthy families that you can apply to your own church experience to determine where you are on the spectrum and then work to develop your health even further. Again, I would, in terms of developing that, I would see episode 6 for some practical ways to do that. We outlined some 6 ways to build more unity, to build more health into a church family. And with that, you can contact us by emailing Mike at findinghealthychurch.com. That's MIKE at findinghealthychurch.com. You can also go to the website to subscribe to our email newsletter at findinghealthychurch.com. We will update you when new resources are out.
Do you know why? Did you ask yourself that question? Why do you try but coming up with these inventions?